and thank you to the bill sponsor for bringing the bill. I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of it. There is the expression of our goals that's in there, and then as I see it, there are kind of three to-dos, three things that the bill would do. One is require the locals to adopt the policy that's consistent with the expression of goals. The second would be, I classify it as a set of HR protections, that if someone does follow the policy, then it prevents retaliation against them, firing, all those different things. And then the third, the increased penalties portion. Are there other action things that I'm missing? Is that a fair characterization?
I really appreciate that question. And if I can, you're not, that's correct. Let me first say that. And then let me drill down on the protections. For schools, aside from just the intent of the General Assembly to follow these state standards, that's where it stops for schools. In Carroll County, we had a librarian with her master's who had studied library science for years. She may have had her PhD. Due to the attacks on her job, her library, her school, she was reassigned to be not for which she had studied her entire life and trained. She then was reassigned as an English teacher. And this bill, as far as schools are concerned, it protects punitive damage to school librarians, to regular librarians, so they can't be fired or reassigned. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. I have questions about each of them, but I'll go to the HR protections portion.
Okay.
So I want to understand the nature of most of our library employees. If they're contractual and it says this is when you're hired, this is when it's done, these are your terms, or are most of them at-will employees?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if Sonia wants to speak to that from Baltimore County.
I can talk about those school people.
Okay.
Did you mean the
I'm
school
sorry,
people?
I didn't fully hear the
Both. It's a
question. Could you
complex
repeat
bill
yourself,
that-
Delegate?
Could you do it once more, Delegate Henson? I apologize.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand the employment nature of the library employees that are referenced in the bill. Are most of them contractual employees where they have a definite, this is when your contract begins, this is when it ends, this is how much, or are they at-will employees?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for repeating that. I think it depends on the library system. In my library system, all of our librarians are employees of the library system. We do not have contractual employees. I think that's just going to depend on the library system. It's going to depend on the school library in terms of how their staff is structured.
Is that consistent with the schools
In the
as
school
well?
system, they're full-time employees, and they advance in the salary schedule and part of our bargaining units. It's only when we cannot find school librarians that there might be any type of contracting services. But and in the elementary school, they often do a lot of they teach classes of students. And in the secondary schools, they are a resource often to students, but they are all degreed and longtime teachers.
So, and employment law is not my area of expertise, disclaimer. But it's my understanding that in Maryland, it's an at-will state. And so it sounds like that's consistent with our libraries, which means you could be fired for any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not discriminatory, as long as it's not the result of retaliation. So it is not like you have a contractual employee where, you have these performance metrics specifically, and then if not, you violated your contract, we can terminate and you're gone. But I'm sorry, I am getting to a question. But with at-will employees, it sounds like this bill would kind of alter that structure, and it would put a different element in there that even an at-will employee, it now says that they could not be fired if they act in a way that's consistent with the state policy. So it's making an alteration there, almost making another protected class, if you will, for our employees. I wanted to know who would enforce that structure there. Would it just be through civil law, where if you are fired for that reason, you file a civil lawsuit? Would it be Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, where our employment law is handled? Like, who would handle that kind of fundamental change in that at-will structure?
I'm not sure if we're on the same terminology of contract and at-will.
Sure.
So our contract, we have bargaining contracts. So Michelle is a school librarian in Montgomery County. She's covered under the bargaining laws as a school system employee. If she were to come under scrutiny And for this, she would have to have her due process, and she would have attorneys within our union to conduct her due process with the school system. And so I'm not sure, I think we were mixing up what contract and at will, or I didn't have the same understanding.
I think we are talking about contract in terms of the collective bargaining agreement
under
that
the
you
collective
have,
bargaining.
as opposed to just the individual who has a performance contract that says you individual must do these 5 things, and then if you don't, we can let you go for breach of this particular contract.
We
So I
don't
think
have
we
that.
are, okay. I think we're in the realm of at-will employees. So I'm trying to understand who would be responsible for enforcing it if someone is unfairly if the bill passes and someone's unfairly terminated in violation of the bill, what's the enforcement authority?
We're going to have to get that. We're going to have to follow up with your office on that.
Okay, sure. And it, like, we just figured out, it's complex because you have the contract for, the labor agreement, and then you have individual employees. So I certainly can get a follow-up on that. I also want to understand the part that requires locals to adopt a policy. Am I understanding it correct that the bill is not speaking specifically to the policy, it just requires them to adopt a policy that's consistent with the goals that are expressed? Is that correct?
That is correct. And
So-
I'm sorry, I'm not on the mic. Many of these localities and jurisdictions already do have policies. They have collection policies. We are also saying that the state standards for libraries should also be reflective in that.
Fantastic. So if they do adopt a policy, then they've met the burden. Am I understanding that right? That's correct.
That is correct. That is correct, as long as they then follow that.
That's my next question.
Right.
So if I'm understanding the bill correctly, the affirmative duty is to adopt the policy, not follow the policy. Am I
There's-
missing that part?
Let me flip to the page.
Okay.
Governing board, SLRC funding, I have a bill on that too. The mens rea of the shadow ban. You're going to want to flip to page 19. Is one of the places. If you don't follow the adopted policies, there is a mechanism for which, I think, it's not a legal term, but I have heard many bill drafters say it recently, you can claw back the money.
I appreciate that. The way I read the clause on page 19 is it talks about the adoption of a policy, like that's the action that needs to happen.
Well, down further, the
Okay.
bold, line 20, including the requirement that the county library be operated in a manner that's consistent with that is the section, for my understanding, that this is the clawback mechanism.
Perfect. I think we are saying something different, and I will agree to disagree on that part. When it comes to the increased penalties, where it would
Yes.
increase the penalty, are you looking for police to enforce that? How does that happen if a person defaces a book or does something different? Is that the state's attorney? They get a citation written, they go to court? Like, what happens
Well, the
there?
state's attorney did weigh in, the attorney general did weigh in. This was already in standing law.
Sure.
So this is just upping the fine. We add in the knowingly, because as you well know, we have a colleague very close to us who did some stuff on fine free for children several years ago.
We do.
And this is about shadow bans, Delegate Henson. And what is happening in our very county at the Michael E. Bush Library is there will be a large table, and Mr. Skippold can speak to this later, of books on a month of celebration for a class of people, and every single one of those books will be taken. So that is a way, and then taken and kept for like 6 weeks, so that no one can potentially learn, grow, or have that book. So this was already in law. We just upped it and added the mens rea portion. I am right now at 6:14 forgetting who. I think that's the state's attorney. Let me follow up with you.
I would love to know that, because if we are talking about asking police to come into our libraries
No.
and to,
Yes, I agree.
if we are talking about asking police to come into our libraries and to enforce these with greater penalties, and then people are, in court, subject to the criminal legal process, I would want to clearly understand that while making a decision on the bill. I also wanted to ask about the portion that talks about the interest of all persons. And I think that's in the part that goes over the standard. If I'm not mistaken, that would be on page, what is that, 2 at the bottom? It says, it is the goal of the state that each library is operated in a manner that recognizes the following standards. And then it says, library materials, services, and resources exist and should be provided for the interest, and then I'm gonna skip the rest because it's, you know, the
Information,
interest
like,
of all persons. So is that placing an affirmative duty to make sure that the library has materials, services, and resources that exist for the interest of all persons?
That's what we strive to do.
And that's what they strive to do now, ma'am.
And we
I
have,
can-
if somebody comes in and they can't find some material that reflects that, then we are willing to order something for them to
I
meet that
can
need.
appreciate that. What I'm trying to flesh out is, what if a person is interested in pedophilia or violence against persons, or I don't know, what prurient interest a person could have?
That's where the collection development policy comes in.
I want to,
That's established by each locality.
I'd like to discuss that too. As it relates to the purpose and intent of the bill, having the benefit of having the crafters of it here with us, when it comes to the interest of all persons, I just want to be clear. Are you saying, so all persons is not exclusive of any person's interest? We do mean all persons. Is that right?
We do, but there are limits on what each library system puts in their collection, and that's based on their collection development policy.
Sure, and I appreciate understanding that better because libraries are incredibly complex in their structure of who does what and who's employed by whom and what. And I heard several times in the testimony that we trust our librarians to curate collections based on the needs of their community. But it sounds to me like this bill is taking away some of that trust, and it's saying, no, we don't want our local librarians to act uninterrupted for the needs of the community. We want to layer on this state level and this state standard, and then they can act in the needs of their community. So I'm almost done.